Hi everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. If you've had an encounter of your own and would like to speak with me whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. If you want to continue listening to episodes of the show on YouTube, nothing's going to change even after the subscription program begins on December 15th. Episodes of every show will be free of charge as always on YouTube if you want to listen to them that way. There will be commercials though. If you want to listen to episodes of the show without any commercial interruptions, that's when the subscription program comes in. If you want to find out more about this subscription program, please go to dogmanencountersradio.com and visit the How to Listen page. Again, that subscription program is going to start on December 15th. All right, let's bring on tonight's guest. Tonight's guest is Jane Rodriguez. Jane, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you.
Thanks for being here. Jane, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Well, I am a mother of two little girls. I've been homeschooling the older one up until this year, so this year I have a lot more time to devote to my interest and my job, which is one of my jobs aside from being a musician and a mom. I write about cryptids and paranormal anomalies and what's called now fringe Christianity, and fully host a show called Cafe Enigma, which deals with all manner of these kinds of topics. It's been around for a while. Mark Witashik founded it about 5-7 years ago. I have had a lifetime of strange experiences. My parents have as well. My dad's Apache Mexican. His dad was born on a reservation in Jerome, Arizona, a long time ago, actually. His parents were older when they had him, so it was pretty close to the Wild West days. And my dad's about 69 years old, and his dad was about 45, 50 years old when he had him. So do the math, that was quite some time ago. And I believe that the Apache blood has something to do with the encounters that he's had, and possibly mine too. And my mom, she's white, but she's Celtic, and to me, genetics have something to do with who sees these things and who doesn't, but I can get into that later. But that's briefly a little sketch of me. I play the saxophone, in a band locally. I'm a mom, and I'm a writer and a show host, kind of like what you do, a little bit.
It sounds like you're really well-rounded.
Oh, thanks.
You're welcome. Growing up, what kind of affinity did you have for monsters and things that go bump in the night? Of course, you were surrounded by it, considering all the things you just told us about in your bio, but exactly how interested were you in things like that when you were young?
Oh, very interested. And it's funny to see my daughter is kind of picking up the tradition herself now, but like I said, I don't know if it's nature or nurture. I think it's both nature and nurture. I was I still am very fascinated with myths, all the ancient ones, Greek, Indian from India, and Native American. I always thought and felt and had faith in my heart when I was a little kid that those myths and stuff that they talked about weren't completely all made up. I always felt that there was kernels of truth to them, and they were very fascinating to me. I remember the Aesop's fables that I would read, just the morals of the story were awesome, and then the Greek myths, the pictures that I would see along with them with the Gorgons and the Minotaur. All those are really, really fascinating to me. So, yeah, I've always taken an interest in it.
I do believe in the adage, where there's smoke, there's fire. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of our legends are based in truth, at least to a certain degree.
Absolutely. And the research that I have been doing and what I've heard from other researchers who have been mulling this over and looking into this topic specifically for many years, J.C. Johnson, my mentor included. And if you even look at the show Ancient Aliens, you can see that the ancient cultures, and I'm talking thousands and thousands of years ago, that were really advanced. There's no way around it that they all do tend to talk about ancient civilizations or ancient visitors that would introduce genetic manipulation, high technology. And I really think that thousands of years ago, the gods of Mount Olympus were probably rooted in a reality in that there was some genetic manipulation that was going on back then. And, even the Bible states that there was giants in the land, and the Indians here in the United States all talk about the Anasazi and talk about the red-haired giants, and we even have artifacts and remains, skeletal remains of them. The men of renown, the Epic of Gilgamesh, they all talk about genetic manipulation. The Book of Enoch comes to mind as well, where it explicitly talks about 200 angels that fell with Lucifer and started to tinker around with the genetics of the earth, including animals. So I think that those ancient stories that are just dismissed nowadays, usually as myths, are really rooted in quite a bit of fact. I like to look at these ancient manuscripts, whether it be Judaic or Vedic or Greek, they all kind of sing the same tune, so that's pretty interesting to me.
It is really interesting. Seems like the deeper you get into it, the more you find out that you just don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Huh. Yeah, sure does seem to be. Have you always believed in Sasquatch, or did it take you time to warm up to the idea of their existence?
For a long time, I just didn't know, because I kind of took the same position that many people take now. And I really think, not to sound rude or anything, I just think that it's an easier way out to just kind of dismiss it, because it does take some thought to think about it. And the way I thought about it before I devoted more time into thinking about it was that, why aren't there remains? There would be remains of them, and more people would see them. And then, and as years went by, I thought about it, and, it's just not that easy. It's not that simple of an answer, because there's many sides to this equation. There's no easy blanket answer. Like the remains, for instance, we don't see bear remains that often. I go out into the woods. I live in a semi-rural area. You don't see even deer remains a lot. And the more that I research these things, the more complex it becomes. Like you said, we just don't know, because there's so many aspects to it. There's the David Paulides missing 411. We just don't, there's so many possible answers, and there's not just one, but, there are several that could be what's happening to these people. And, there's people who have had lots of research, or Indian account, like Native American accounts. They'll talk about burial mounds of the Sasquatch, and that's possibly why we don't see remains to this day, So I would say that I thought about it, but not that much. So I kind of just brushed it aside until I was ready to contemplate it more and devote some more research to it. Until about fairly recently, I'd say I was always researching metaphysics, or, like I said, I'm a Christian, but I tend to talk about things that a lot of mainstream Christians don't talk about, these topics included, simply because it's just so outside of the norm. You don't go to a church these days and find a pastor that's talking about the Nephilim, even though it's in the Bible. So my research, or the things I would think about it as it pertains to this kind of topic, would always be more on a metaphysical side or supernatural side, or, things of that nature. So the cryptozoology aspect has, even though my parents have had encounters, it hasn't been really a focal point of mine until about, I'd say, 5 to 7 years ago.
It sounds like now that you're into it, you've jumped in with both feet, and that's good to hear.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely, there's just so much to this topic. More people are coming forward with stories, and I think that there's more encounters going on, and now in this age that we live in, people are becoming more comfortable with sharing their stories simply because of the frequency of people, the amount of people coming forward. There's less of a stigma associated with sharing their encounters, and because of that, there's more information that's readily available so we can learn more about them.
I'm so glad people are coming forward in bigger numbers all the time. It's a shame when you have an experience like that that's so hard to deal with that for the longest time people felt like they had to hold it in and just suffer. Like I said, I'm so glad that that's becoming a thing of the past. You mentioned the fact that your parents have had cryptid sightings of their own. Please tell us more about that.
Yeah, they have. Well, okay, so I live in the house now that I grew up in. I'm renting it from my parents. They live in another home that's really close by. And the house that I live in, I lived there since I was about 3 years old. So obviously I know the property and the home really well. And my mom, this is a more recent one. I'd say I was probably in high school when she said she saw this thing. It's like right outside my door, my front door. I've got a steep driveway that goes up. You know, it's kind of like on a, I would say like a 60% incline. And then to the side, there's a little stone path. I got a front yard with a couple trees in it, and it's wooded. It's a dead end in a kind of rural setting. There's trees on both sides of the street, and it's pretty dark, and it's really quiet, and I love that area. I love my roads for that reason. But like I said, there's like a stone path on the left-hand side after you open the door about 10 feet away from the door, from the porch. And there's a little fountain with an old man. You know, it's like a little sculpture fountain, bird bath type of thing. And the stone path leads from the driveway to the yard. And there's kind of like some landscaping on both sides of this path. So one day she said it was around spring and there was not a lot of leaves out yet. It was pretty early still. And she said she was just opening the door to do something. I don't, you know, maybe get the mail, whatever. But she said on that stone path, she caught quickly out of the corner of her eye, but no, she said, actually, no, she said she saw it. She saw it was moving so fast was the thing. This thing that was about 4 feet off the ground, really long, with this matted, thick, weird fur and a weird body shape that just, she doesn't even have any clue, you know, what animal would look like that. She said it was on four legs, but just how high it was off the ground and how long it was and the weird fur. And I'm like, well, do you think it had mange or something? She's like, no, it wasn't like that. She was just like, it was just really weird. Like, she's like, there's no animal around here in northern Illinois that looks like that. I have no idea what it was. And it went away so fast that, you know, she's like, it scared me. She said I shut the door right away, locked it, and she's like, I've never seen it again. But whatever that was, it was just not normal. So, and that was my mom's. And then my dad's, it's in the area again, northern Illinois, about 7 minutes away. There's an intersection that is right on the border of a state park, the Chena Lake State Park. And at that time, at this T intersection, now it's a stop and go light, but then it was just a stop sign. And like I said, it's a T intersection. There's no straight, there's only left or right. And if you go right, you're going to be heading into a golf course and eventually the state park. And if you go left, it's more residential and, you know, a couple of restaurants. But still, like I said, it's not very populated out here. There's a lot of woods out here, a lot of cornfield. And he was rolling up there, coming home from work one day. This was when I was about, junior high age, like 7th grade, 8th grade, something like that. And it was weird because me and my mom were both at home, and she was watching a show called Sightings, and this was back in the day, and I don't know if you remember that show, but it was a show, I think, on Fox that had all the paranormal, UFO, cryptid, just like a slice of everything, weird, paranormal, you know. And she was at home watching that. Now, that comes into play with the story, because it's pretty weird. So he's coming home while she's at home watching the show, and it's at night. It's around 11 o'clock at night. And it's really dark in this area, and he's rolling up to this intersection where it's just a stop sign at this time, and it's woods. You go left or right on the road, and beyond that there's like a patch of woods and like a couple houses actually, because I go through this intersection quite a bit to this day, and I always think about it when I'm there because it's so weird. And to this day I still have never heard of anyone else ever seeing this kind of thing before. I've never heard about it ever since this. The only time I've ever heard about it is when my mom said she saw it on the show Sightings and when my dad said he saw this thing. And if any listeners out there or if you have heard about this thing, please let me know, because to this day I've been searching high and low. So what he saw when he was stopped there, his headlights were shining into the brush, and he saw a thing. He saw some kind of he said the body was, stick thin. Like, the limbs were made out of, like, had to have been made out of sticks. They were so skinny, they were the size of a stick, like a branch. And that it was tall, and that it had something that looked like hands and fingers that kind of, like, it parted the brush that was in its way. And right when he was, like, pulled up there, like, the thing parted the brush out of its way with its claw hands or whatever. It wasn't claws, it was sticks. But it parted the way so it could peer out at him. And he said the face was shaped, it was completely flat, too. That it was shaped, it was almost two-dimensional. It was, like, shaped like a leaf. It was real long, it was narrow, and just flat. And he's like, I don't know what I'm looking at here. He's like, it freaked me out. He's like, I just looked at it and blinked my eyes and, am I looking at this? Is this real? And he said, I got out of there. He's like, what the heck was it? So this is after, when he's relating it. But, okay, so after he sees this thing, he gets out of there and he comes home and he's all excited naturally. He's got the adrenaline, and I understand this now from my own experience, how excited you get, how pumped up you get, your blood is literally just like, you can feel your heart pounding. He comes home and he's like, Susan, that's the name of Madam. He's like, Susan, it was the weirdest thing. He's like, I just saw something so weird. And she's like, wait a minute. She's like, don't tell me what you saw. Let me draw it out for you. And he's like, okay. He's like, hurry up. Don't waste time. He's like, you'll never guess what it is. And so she takes a piece of paper and she draws it out. She shows it to him, and it's what he saw. He's like, what the heck? He's like, how on earth would you know what I just saw? She's like, well, I just saw on sightings the show that people in this area, northern Illinois or southern Wisconsin, have been seeing this thing. And someone else made a sketch of it. So, there she is making a sketch of the sketch that she saw. And sure enough, it's what he saw. And it's just one of those things that I'll never forget. And to this day, I'll ask him about it. He's like, yeah, I have no idea. I've researched deep into all kinds of weird things, and I've heard of shadow people. I've heard of tall stick-like shadow people that seem two-dimensional, that are just black, that have like no light associated with them. But I've never heard of like a leaf stick man before. Never.
Yeah, that's new and on me too. I've never heard of anything like that.
Me either. And I wanted to see if I can go back to the archives of that show and find that show, because I don't really remember seeing the paper that, like, this is all secondary. Like, I was home, but for some reason, a lot of these stories, like, I don't remember for some reason. Like, so I don't remember seeing the sketch, but I want to see if I can find that show, because I have never heard of it ever myself. So, completely a mystery that's baffling me.
I do remember that show. Sightings was a good show. Yeah, I used to watch it all the time.
Yeah, it was a good show. I liked it too, and I could catch it. And it did have, like, it varied, and it had all kinds of different topics. But, yeah, that's a new one on me.
Yeah, that's pretty strange. When most people have an encounter like that, they normally focus on the head. When you talked about the encounter your mom had, you didn't give all that many details about the head of this creature. How did she describe it? Did it look like a dog's head? What did it look like?
See, that's the thing, and I'm sorry for leaving that part out. She said that when she saw it from the behind. And if memory serves me correctly, that she said it didn't really have much of a tail or something, so she didn't see a head. Because I've asked her that before. I'm like, well, did it look like a dog? Did it look like this? She's like, I don't know, Jane. She's like, all I saw was its long body. I didn't see what the head was. It didn't look feline. The body was not anything that I know of, So I simply just do not know. Both these things are a complete mystery to me. That one had fur. What my dad saw was, who knows? That was made out of sticks. I have no idea.
Oh, there's no problem with that. She saw what she saw. She can't go back and change that. And what your dad saw sounds like it definitely would fall into the category of who knows.
To this day, like, I wish, and I'm sure him especially, wish he has more answers about that, because to see something that nobody else has seen, save for one show that was shown a handful of times back before there was any DVR or anything, like, this is the early 90s, like, that must feel pretty unique. after my encounter, at least I have scores of people that have had experiences, similar to mine. I've seen these creatures, but him seeing what he saw, I just have no idea how he reconciles that.
I'd say so. That had to be quite the experience. You had your Dogman encounter while researching with J.C. Johnson. What happened that night?
Oh, yes, I did. J.C. Johnson is a dear friend of mine, and he's a mentor, and I've been learning a lot from him as we share our experiences and our research and work together for Crypto Four Corners International. He flew me there specifically to investigate with him and do a piece on what's been going on in his friend's, he's now my friend's, property, and it's been going on for decades, for generations. So Ron is the third generation that has been encountering these dogmen. So when I got there, it was already under the premise that there's activity here consistently all the time, and it's been happening for generations. It's so frequent that they see the Dogman family that lives there, that they have encounters, that they have names. The Dogmen have names that they have tracked the family alongside the Dogman family, alongside their own family, and have determined just based on time and biology that the Dogmen of today are the grandchildren of the Dogmen that Ron's grandparents were dealing with. And Ron now is a good friend of mine. He's a very nice man. He's got a very nice property up there in northern Minnesota, very close to the Canadian border. When I got there, it was afternoon. We had just gotten done, JD, which is JC's son, and I and JC had just gotten done shooting some M4s and shotguns and just practicing, our range time, because I got certified while I was up there too to conceal carry in all the blue states. So I'm really proud of that and happy of that and grateful for that. But we were doing that for some time before we ever left to go up north. And when we got there, it was a perfectly sunny afternoon. It was mid-September, and it was, as this year has been unseasonably warm. It was just a real mild day. I remember we were just wearing sweatshirts. It wasn't very cold at all. Everything was still completely in full bloom from the summertime. Maybe not full bloom, but, everything was still green and just all the leaves around the trees. The trees had not even really started to turn at all, the colors even. It was just like everything was, all the grass was long, all the leaves were out, just everything was still pretty much in summer mode. I remember while we were on the road that Ron lives on, it's just way out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, just way out in the middle of nowhere. It's just beautiful country. It reminds me a lot of northern Wisconsin, except northern Wisconsin is a lot more piney. This is a lot more just regular, like maples and oaks and stuff, and it's just gorgeous. But I noticed that as we were getting closer to Ron's property, just the mood started to change a little bit. Like, it was just a vibe. It was a vibe that we were all, I didn't say anything for a while, but eventually the silence was broken as I was driving in with JC. JC's son was behind us. Do you feel that vibe? As we're getting closer to his house, and he's like, yeah, it is weird here. And JC has already had handfuls of encounters over at Ron's by this time too. And he doesn't know if I'm going to be encountering anything or everything or what. And the main concern as we were driving in too, and mine was, there was one dog person, I should say, in particular. Well, she's a female, and the way that this family of dog men tend to behave, it's as if the female is in charge, like it's a Native American group. Some of them are matrilineal. Well, this one seems to be matrilineal, and forgive the language, but they are dog people. They call her the bitch, and her name is also Allura. She's just territorial. She has features that are female, you know what I'm saying, on her chest. She has a fondness and a proclivity for particularly JC and Ron. She'll leave her scent marking on JC's tent when he camps there. Like I said, Ron's family has been having, the whole time they've been there, encounter after encounter that they live alongside these dog people, which is a lot different than most people's encounters, because most people's encounters is that the dog people are very territorial. If you see them on your property, they usually drive you out. You know, there's been sieges I've heard of. They want the people out of there, and they will scare them within inches of their lives to get them out of there or attack them and all of that. And it's just not like that in this case. They live alongside of each other. So to get back to the story, like, okay, so we're driving in, and, you know, like I said, it's a beautiful day, and it's crystal clear out. The sky is blue, and we just get an eerie feeling from the get-go. So when we park, you know, we all get out, and I meet Ron, and Ron's got 3 big, beautiful dogs. One of them's a German Shepherd, which is my favorite, and they're just all big and fluffy and awesome, and, you know, we make our introductions, and JD right off the bat says, you know, I thought I saw something kind of like, I don't know, something weird out of the corner of my eye when we were coming in. And I'm like, okay, you know, who knows? Could have been a deer, could have been anything, but, you know, we all noted that. And right away, you know, JC kind of just launches into everything that goes on there, which is just so much. I mean, there's just so much to say about what goes on in that property. It's just, like I said, like it's an almost everyday thing where either Ron says he sees the heads peering into the windows. He'll wake up in the morning and see fresh tracks that are as wide as the tires on his truck. They'll be kind of like pronged feet, canine obviously, and just, like I said, wide as the tire track. So JC kind of just goes over everything, and then he says, a couple days before I even get there, he's like, Alora's been gone. Like, she hasn't been seen hiding her hair in some time, and Ron thinks she's still gone doing whatever she's doing. And so I'm like, okay, good, because, well, before I even got there, I was kind of just worried, like, well, if this Alora dog man or dog person is that way with JC and Ron, like, has some kind of affinity for them, like, how will she feel about another female being thrown into the mix, since Ron doesn't really have other guests come in that aren't kin? So I was kind of nervous about that, because she's all well and good with them being males, but what about me? Like, will she be threatened? Will she hate me? You know, what's going to happen here? So that being said, I'm like, okay, cool, you know, she's gone. But then also in the corner of my mind, I'm like, well, rats, I hope I still have an experience. Like, I hope I still see something. The day continues, and we just kind of shoot the breeze a little bit. We're all getting acquainted. We go inside. There's another friend of Ron's that's been there. He got there earlier that day. And we're all talking about how JD and I want to go do some recon in the forest. Now, the forest is, when you pull up to the house, there's just a big gravel area where he's got like a tool shed about 40 yards away from the house proper. There's a big old driveway. There's a fire pit. It's like a little bit of a lawn area. And then there's a trail that goes up to the forest. And it's some, like, I would say like 300 yards away from the house, maybe 400 yards away from the house. Before you even get that far to the forest, there's like I said, the trail, and on the right there's bee houses. There's about 4 or 5 bee houses, and that's about 40 yards away from the house proper. And then there's a little ridge of trees that leads into the main forest part. And back there he's got alfalfa fields in the forest, like intermittently spaced out. He grows alfalfa. So, okay, it's still midday. It's around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and JD and I are like, okay. He's like, it's pretty weird, Jane. He's like, this is almost a year to the day that I was here last. My first time was last year to almost the day. I'm like, wow, that's cool. He's like, I'm going to take you back there. I'm going to take my AR-15. You can have the pistol. And I'm all excited because I just got certified, and, you know, I have my holster on. JC gave me a tac vest, so I'm wearing a tac vest. I have the video cam recorder that JD just got me, a nice new digital one. I had it in my front vest. JC's like, I want you to film my son while you're in the car. You know, ask him questions about what he saw, where he's going to take you, the prints he saw, everything. Make sure you get some nice footage of where he was and where you are now, you know, and just record all of that. And I'm like, yeah, for sure. And we're excited, and I'm excited. And so he takes me up there, and I got the camera rolling on him, and I'm asking him questions. And like, so it's been a year to the day. And I'm like, well, tell me where you're taking me now. And he's like, well, we're going to go to the edge of the forest right now. And I'm going to show you pretty close to the edge of the forest where we first come in. There's a couple of little trails for hunting purposes. You can drive a vehicle through them. They're that wide. There's just trails down the middle of the forest and just, through the forest, certain ones. And it's cleared out just enough for a vehicle to get through. The first thing he took me to was this place he calls the OP, which stands for Observational Point. Now, JD has been deployed to Afghanistan a couple times that I know of, probably more. He is a highly decorated Army veteran. He has had firsthand combat many times. He's been the hero of a few different situations. He knows what it's like to be in a high-stress situation where, like I said, there's combat going on, and you got to survive, you got to do your mission, all that stuff under high stress. And he's also trained as tracker, so he knows what he's doing. So he takes me to the OP, the observational point. It's a high bluff. Like I said, it's a little hill, and all this grass is around. It's tall grass, and in the middle of the tall grass, on the very peak of this hill, you can see how 15 feet in diameter, probably 20 feet in diameter, you can see squashed down grass. And JD always refers to these dogmen here as lazy hunters because you can see how he's like, here's where I saw some tracks before, and then sure enough, we see newer tracks. I don't know if they were made probably within the last couple of days. It hadn't rained, by the way, in at least 3 or 4 days before we got there. So there were some pretty decent-sized tracks that we saw. He's like, I saw them here before. And like I said, there's squashed down grass, and he's like, look here, Jane. He's like, stand here. He's like, look how you can see Ron's house perfectly, and then also Ron's neighbor's house perfectly. He's like, that's why I mean the observational point. Like, these things can look at both properties, clear view, unobstructed, and also see for a long distance whether there's any deer or anything crossing the paths here so they can hunt. Lazy hunters, they can easily see. So I'm like, wow, cool. I'm looking at all this evidence and it's like, wow, this is awesome. Like, this is crazy. I can't believe I've been researching all this for so long and reading about all these experiences. And here I am looking at physical evidence right here, just right here. And here I just got a head full of stories of, just a couple days ago, Ron sees them. He sees them all the time. JC too. And so I take some good video shots of that and I ask him some questions, and we get back in the truck, and he's like, okay, so we're going to go back into the forest where I was. We're going to go on foot. Eventually, I want to lead you to where he calls it like a lair. He's like, deep in this forest, like at a certain point I'm going to take you, you can see that there's structures made, and it's an obvious manipulation with something that has the ability to make structures. Like I said, like you can see that it's been manipulated, that it's some kind of place they like to go or something, So I'm like, okay, like I said, it's a really weird feeling back there. It's just a very heavy, noticeable, thick feeling, like you can cut it with a knife. And we're back there, and he's taking me around the forest, and we're finding some prints. Now that we're so far away and we're deep into the forest, I'm starting to get a little uneasy. I'm with JD, so it makes me feel a lot more confident, but yet still, I got my weapon, he's got his. And while we're walking through, like I said, before I ever got there, I've heard so many stories of when people say, I was in the forest and all of a sudden it went dead quiet. All right, well, that happened. The first time that happened with JD and I, while we were walking through the forest, it was crazy. The forest was alive with animals. Well, it was alive with birds. They were very, very noisy. The crickets were out. It was like a late summer day in the middle of September. Everything was very, very active. And you could hear everything, that the forest was alive. But while we were walking and looking, the forest went quiet. And that's when he was like, I can tell when the change in him, when he got serious, he was like, take a knee. And he said it very quietly. So the forest went quiet. He's like, take a knee. And he said it under his breath, real quiet. And he's like, be quiet. Don't say anything. Don't say a word. Breathe through your mouth. And when that happened, my heart started pounding through my chest. I could feel it in my throat. In fact, when I'm talking about it now, it's like reliving the moment. Like, I was so afraid. I was certain that something was watching us. Certain. And when the forest goes quiet like that in an instant, it's just the most, I call it a disgusting feeling, because you know that something is watching you and it's a predator. And it's an apex predator, and it's just a horrible, horrible feeling because you don't know where it's coming from, and that's why he told us to take an E, so we can become as quiet as possible, so we can become completely aware of every sound. So that way, during that dead silence, if we heard a twig snap, we'd hear it. We would be in that position just watching and waiting and listening until the forest came back alive with the noises. And it did eventually, after what seemed like an eternity, probably was only 5 minutes. And the forest would come back alive, and we'd start walking very cautiously again. He was, trying to remind me nicely as possible, like, please try to be quiet as possible, harness your Apache, your Apache blood, and just try to be stealthy. And so I'm like, okay. And so the forest went quiet at least 4 more times. And every time that horrible heart-pounding feeling where it's like, okay, what am I doing here? Like, this is too scary. And, but, I just kept pressing on because I went through all this trouble. JC did, JD did, and I really did. I really did want to be there, and I wanted to collect the evidence. So, I just pressed on. I got brave. I mustered up the courage, and we eventually made it to the lair. And when we were there, we walked across the trails that go through the center of the forest that a vehicle can go through. So, like I said, it's dry dirt. It's not muddy. So we were walking through one of them that cut through, and he's trying to remember himself, too, where it is. So we're walking up to it, and that's basically, again, while we're there, we're approaching this area where he's like, I know that something must come here frequently because look, Jane, he's like, we're approaching, he's like, it's still that way. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so freaky. All of this is real. It's one thing to write about it and listen to it and hear other people talk about it and think in your head, oh yeah, I believe that it exists. I did believe it existed beforehand, but it's another thing entirely to be there and looking at even secondhand evidence. Even just seeing a structure is just really, really, really kind of scary. Because that when you're seeing it with your own 5 senses, you know that it's there, it's real, and plus you're physically there. So we're approaching the area, and I'm looking at the structures myself with my own 2 eyes, and that's another time when the forest went silent. And there's a couple times where he told me to put my hand on my gun, unholster it. So the thing about JD is that he wouldn't tell me when he observed certain things that were approaching a danger zone, maybe because he didn't want me to panic. Because I was on the verge of panicking a couple of times. Like when he told me to unholster my weapon and put my hand on my gun while we were there in the lair area, or whatever you want to call it. It's just a horrible, horrible feeling. You just don't know what's going to happen. And my heart was just beating out of control. I didn't know how much more I could stand of it. So I'm recording as much as I can off and on. There's times when he's like, shut it off, it's more important to be safe than capture evidence right at this point, because there's just a lot we were seeing. And so I'm like, please, can we go back? After we walked through it, we went into the lair. We looked at the structure itself. It was like a little bit, like you walk through the forest and there's a little bit of the clearing. And you can see, like, again, there's pressed down area in the bush where there's something that's huge laying there. Again, it's like 15 feet diameter. Well, here is like 20, 25 feet. And you can see, like, against some trees that there's like a big rectangle almost of just branches that are arranged that are sticking up and then over. And it looks like a little bit like a lean-to. Only it's not leaning. It's just like, I can't explain it. It's like a Stonehenge shape, like where the branches are sticking straight up, and then you got ones that are like sticking across to make like a rectangle type of thing. And so like we went through that area, and the whole idea was to go around and go back to the car, his Jeep. So we eventually get there, steadily, and we don't want to make a lot of noise because we are aware after the forest going quiet that many times that there's obviously something there besides us. So we get there, and I'm just like, oh my God, like that really happened. And I'm like, okay, let's go. And we get into the vehicle, and we're driving away back towards Ron's, and he said, that's obviously a lure, an entrapment lure. I'm like, what? He's like, I just saw something just kind of poke out and shake the trees enough, and I know what they're doing. And he's like, I've seen that happen in Afghanistan before. He's like, they're trying to garner our interest enough to go back there. And I'm like, well, why would they want us back there? We're just there. He's like, I don't know, probably to maybe a trap or something. He's like, I don't know, but we're not doing it. We're not going to take the bait. He's like, they're baiting us. So I'm like, okay, let's go. So we go, and we head back, and I'm like all excited and stuff. I got all this footage, and we get into the house, and, you know, JC is like, so what'd you find? And I'm like, oh my gosh, we found so much. You know, we found the OPs, just like JD remembers. Like, everything is squashed down just the same before. There's still tracks there. Like, there's new ones. You know, I'm all excited. I'm talking a million miles an hour, and he's like, wow, cool. He's like, oh, yeah, I forgot to say, while we were back there, that was one of the more harrowing parts. While we were leaving, we heard a howl, a straight-up howl. And that was right around the time when he saw the forest kind of jiggle to try to get us back. Like, we heard something go, ow! And it was to the left of where we were, pretty far away. And we were like, oh my God, you know. We heard it. So we get back, and we're kind of like briefing JC, and he's like, did you hear that howl, by the way? And I'm like, yeah. We're both like, yeah, we heard it. He's like, yeah, that was, and I'm like, where was it? He's like pointing to the same direction that we were at. So it was like up and to the left of him. And it was, I guess it was to the right of where we were, but regardless. So like we're telling him about everything, and I remember distinctly too, by the way, I put the camera on the kitchen table, and we had been in and out of that house all day, going to the fire, you know, making food, coming in and out with the dogs and stuff like that, just walking around, and we shot off a couple guns and stuff. He's got targets, and, you know, I walk in to look at my camera and to look at the footage, and I can't find it anywhere. You know, it was something that was bothering me the whole day while I was there, because not only did I have awesome footage on it from, like, the whole time I was there, but JC just got that thing for me, you know, and it's totally embarrassing to just lose something that you just got that was a gift for you. And, you know, eventually I told Jay, I'm like, JC, I can't find the camera anywhere. He's like, I'm like, I know that I put it on the table because it was in my front pocket in my tack vest, and I put it on the table, and I just don't know where it could be. And he's like, well, Jane, he's like, that same thing happened to me once. He's like, I know I put my sunglasses down on the counter here. He's like, this happened to me like a year ago. He's like, I put my glasses down on the counter here. I step outside of the house. I come in, they're gone. Ron finds them on the kitchen table 6 months later. They're my glasses. He's like, Jane, they come in the house. So he's like, these dogmen, they come in the house. They look in the windows. They're just all around all the time. And for instance, the other day, a few weeks ago, Ron was telling me how his friend that I met was deer hunting, and just to see what would happen since there was particularly high activity that week, they left the deer carcass out with the organ meat in it, so the organs, and they saw the silhouette of a dog man. They know who it is, too. They know it's a juvenile, a young male. They saw him take out the livers and you know, everything. And they saw him do it. You know, they were about 300 yards away, but they saw it. They saw it happen, and, you know, sure enough, the organs were gone. Their eyes weren't playing tricks on them. They come up to the carcass sometime later, and sure enough, all the organs were gone. So that's what happened the first part of the day. Then more things happened later that night, and I can go into that right now if you like.
Please do.
Okay, so some time passes and sun sets, and we're all pretty excited from just the little recon mission that we did right then and there. Now, another thing that's distinguishable about that property is that there's not only dogmen there, but there's Sasquatch there as well. And they all seem to live side by side. And while we were gone, JC also, like I should add, like he was hearing stuff, like he has something about him where the Sasquatch know him. Like no matter, like they just, it's weird because like once you have an encounter, it seems like it's like an egg yolk has been broken. Like there's like a mark that's made on you or something. And it seems to me that once a person has an encounter, certain people, especially, like, they'll tend to have repeat. Well, JC is obviously, he's pretty well known. He has lots of videos and documentaries that he's made, and he just has an affinity for the furry people, he calls them. And, like, he was saying, like, as the sun set and when it was dark, he's like, yeah, we're surrounded right now. Like, there's Squatch all around us. And he's like, I know this for a fact. He's like, here's what I'm going to do. He's like, Jane, you hold these flashlights. We're all going to go down this trail. Like, if you remember, I was talking about the bee houses that were not too far from the house, to the right of the house, you know, up the trail. There's the bee houses, and there's that little patch of forest that leads into the big part of the forest. And he's like, here's what I'm going to do. He's like, Jane, take all these flashlights. We're all going to go up the trail. We're all going to go here past the bee houses. I'm just going to introduce us all. I'm going to say to the Sasquatch that are all around us right now, I'm going to say to them, we mean no harm. We just want to basically hang out. You know, how are you? We're just friends. We're not going to bother you. And, you know, just how are you? You know, kind of thing. So, you know, at this point, I'm like, hey, that'd be cool if something happened. I don't know. You know, I don't know what to expect. It's pretty fantastic to think that they're surrounding you, first of all, then to think that he's going to say hi to one. You know, you don't know what's going to happen. So he's like, who wants to come with me? And there's one guy named Bryce who's never had an encounter with a cryptid before. He was like me. I never had an encounter with a cryptid before. I've had plenty of encounters with all kinds of different things, but never a cryptid. So he's never had an encounter with a cryptid. He's like totally excited about it. He's like, I'll go. So we're all nervous, of course, and we're all got that adrenaline going. And we walk up the trail, and I've got the flashlight. JD, by the way, is super excited about this equipment that he has. It's the night vision goggles. It's like an Army issue, but it's a little bit of older technology. What they have now is even way better than what he had, but it's still pretty awesome. It makes everything look green. You can be looking at stark darkness at night, and everything illuminates up perfectly, and it's green, and you can just look at everything awesome. And it happened to be a full moon that night, too. So we're trading the goggles back and forth as we're walking up the trail, and it wasn't a long walk. It was only 40 yards, so we go up, and then we cross over past the bee house. Well, actually, we stay on the trail. JD and I and Ron stay on the trail, and JC's like, okay, now we're going to go into the forest, and we're going to make our introductions after we walk up a little bit. So Bryce and him go walking up, and JD has the night vision goggles before the camera lens, so he's filming it, but he's filming it through the night vision, so you can see everything pretty well. And while he's filming it, he's about, I don't know, like 6'1" or something, or maybe 6 feet, and I'm 5'3", so I'm on my tippy toes. I'm looking over his shoulder, so I can see what he's looking at through the night vision. And poor Ron, he's a giant man. He's like 6'4", 6'5". He's like in the background just watching everything. And here I am, like little me, just looking through the night vision, peering over John's shoulder, and that's when JC starts doing his, whoo, oh, you know, kind of thing, like, hey. And we're just kind of like standing there like, wow. And I can see JC and Bryce. Bryce has a flashlight. They're kind of obscured by some trees, but I can still see them. And they're pointing, they're facing to my right, but which is in front of them. So they're looking straight ahead of themselves. And I'm looking right in front of myself, and it's to the right of them. They only have like one flashlight, but JC's telling Bryce to not shine it at the forest where he is directing his calls, because he doesn't want to make anything that's bashful over there, you know, not want to make itself known. So I think that was his reasoning. And so he makes his calls and starts talking, and I'm looking over JD's shoulder, and sure enough, right behind this pine tree, it's really hard to gauge how tall things are from that far of a distance, but right behind this pine tree was a Bigfoot. And I could see it plain as day. Well, of course, through the night vision goggles, but there it was, right in front of us. And boy, that's when I was just like, I wasn't scared. I was just so excited. All these things are going through my mind, and like my emotions, I was just so excited. I'm like, this is so real. Like, oh my gosh, this is happening. Look at it. And I have footage of it. I'm like, JD, you see that? You see that? It's right there. Oh my God. He's like, yeah. He's like, yep, definitely. And, he's pretty, he's pretty, like, mellow, even keel. He doesn't react very strongly. He kind of keeps everything, plays his cards close to the vest. So I'm just like, oh my gosh. And JC is, like, talking to it, and you can just kind of see it peek its head around the freaking pine tree and look at them, and then go back. Because mind you, the Squatch has no idea that we're standing. It probably knows we're there, but it doesn't know that we have night vision goggles. So it thinks that we're just like, their naked eye has no idea. Because they're very shy, right? So it's peeking at them, and they're just standing there looking at it, and I'm just like going crazy. I'm just so happy. I'm just like, wow, this thing is so cool. Like, I'm like, this thing is nice. Like, this Sasquatch is just a nice guy. Like, in my mind, I just somehow, like, knew it. I could be wrong, but in my mind, I'm like, this is a nice guy, Sasquatch. Like, in my mind, it felt like he was a young guy. And it just felt like, it didn't feel like I was looking at an ape or anything either. It felt to me like I was looking at another person, kind of, in a way, like, in a big way, actually. It felt like I was, like, looking at something, like, so unbelievable, like a scientific discovery, it was just amazing. And so JC tells Bryce to shine the flashlight at it, and that's when the Sasquatch changes its profile, so it makes itself thin to them. Like, you know what I mean? Like, at first it was standing straight head on to them, so it was facing them. And then when he shined the flashlight on it went behind the pine tree again, but it stood so its profile was towards them. So it made itself thin. So when it did that, we could see the whole backside of it, or maybe it was facing us. I can't tell from that distance, but we could see the whole body, like, as it was facing us. When we were looking at it before he shined the flashlight, we were looking at its profile until they shined the flashlight at it. Then it changed its profile to them, and we got the full brunt of its body. And the thing was thick. It was broad. And it was just this big, meaty, like, muscular, like, dude. Like, his head went into his shoulders, and it looked like his trapezoids were like, he didn't have a neck. He was all thick muscle and trapezoids going up to his head, is what his body looked like from that perspective. We were only able to look at it from that perspective for just a few moments, because then, I didn't see this, I saw some movement, but I didn't see them. But he's like, there's some movement to the right. Something else is coming in. There's more coming in. He's like, get out of there now. He didn't want them back there with more coming towards them. So that was pretty exciting too, knowing that there was more. There was more coming to that area. And I mean, it was just like, it was unbelievable. I don't even know how to convey. There's a little bit of fear, obviously, when you think about more coming in. And that's why JD didn't feel that it was safe to stick around, after there was more than one. So he's like, Dad, he's like, JC, get back here, so he called him in. And that's pretty much when, that whole experience ended. They were walking back, and then JD put the goggles down, and JC and Bryce walked back, and we were just all like, oh my gosh, that was so awesome. I'm like, I saw my first Sasquatch, oh my Lord, it was so freaking unreal. Like, it's real though, like, it's real. When you see something like that, even if you're a believer, even if you're a researcher like I am, when you finally see something like that, it's like, are my eyes seeing this? Yes, they are. Oh my goodness, that is amazing. So I was pretty excited, and JC was like, yep, I knew it, told you so. We were surrounded. He was like, they're out there, and he's like, they're over here, and the dogmen are over there, apparently, or whatever. So that was that, and while my adrenaline was high and I was all excited, I look at JD and I'm like, you want to head back over there now? He's like, yes. I'm thinking in the back of my mind, I'm like, what did I just get myself into? Yeah, let's do it. Like a strike rifle iron's hot. So we tell everyone, we get ready. I put my gear on. I layer up because it's getting colder, and we get ready. We put our weapons in our holster, or I put my sidearm back on. And actually, you know what? JC told me never to take my sidearm off the whole time I was there, just because it's Boogeyman Land. I mean, there's just so much going on there. Obviously, like, he's like, I don't want anything happen to you. Like, he's like, that's my number one priority is your safety, Jane. He's like, I would never be able to live with myself ever if anything bad happened to you. He's like, that is not allowed, and that's not going to happen. So you always have that sidearm on. So, I just never took it off of me. I even slept with it just like right there, like right by my bed. So we're getting ready to go back in. And of course, like I said, there's excitement and nervousness and fear. And while the adrenaline's still coursing through my body, I'm just like, yeah, we got to do this. So we go back in there, we get in the car, and he's got the night vision. I filmed this experience, but I used JC's camcorder. Okay, so I've got the camcorder. He's got the goggles because he's like, Jane, I do not want to have the headlights on if I can't help it because I want to have them come out. That's the whole idea, is to get something on film, right? I'm like, yes. He's like, okay then. He's like, I'm not going to use the headlights unless it's absolutely necessary. And he's doing this, like everything he's doing is like so regulated and trained. Like you can obviously tell he knows what he's doing because he's done this in high-stakes situations where lives depend on it, type of thing. So we go into the forest, and I've got the camcorder. He doesn't have the headlights on. He's looking through the goggles, and I wasn't very far into it where we're driving along, and we hear something go flap on the back of the bumper. That was really, 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 really scary. That was really scary because I just saw the Sasquatch, and I know this sounds like, how do you know for sure? But I know that it wasn't a Sasquatch. I know from the amount of terror and fear that I felt in the daytime, just having that forest go silent and looking at the tracks, the huge tracks, that what hit our car was a Dogman. So, and that we can hear it keeping pace with us. And it only, in my mind, I'm like, well, why would it hit our car like that? Is it messing with us? It doesn't want to hurt us. And it's at this time I'm getting pretty scared, really, really scared, because, like I said, it's one thing to hear a story, and it's one thing to write about it, and it's one thing to listen about it all the time. It doesn't matter. You can do all that you want. It doesn't matter. When you have an experience like that, it's happening to you. It's really, really terrifying because it's so unknown. What you're dealing with is just, you just don't know what's going to happen. You don't know a lot about these things. So after that happened, like, I'm just like almost on the verge of tears, and my heart's pounding out of my chest again. And he's like, Jane, get a hold of yourself. He's like, I can hear it following us. I can hear its breath. And he's like, you came out here for this reason, right? And I'm like, yes. He's like, well, you came all the way out here for this. He's like, I know you can do this. He's like, there's no reason to be that scared. He's like, rein it in. He's like, there's no reason to panic. He's like, panic kills. He's like, when you panic, that's when you get yourself killed because you start making stupid decisions. And I'm like, you're right. I know it. So I'm like, okay. So we keep driving, and we're going to take that one trail that leads kind of by the lair. And it's that trail, it's a vehicle trail that leads right through the forest. Like I said, it hadn't rained in days. The ground was hard. It was not soft. It was nothing. It's flat over there. When we got to the trail one of the trails that cut through the forest by the lair, all of a sudden while we were there this time, there was like at least 4 to 6 inches of water flooding it, rushing in from somewhere. That was just so weird. Like, where did the water come from? Why is it rushing like that? There's no irrigation, there's nothing like that. We asked later, and we knew in our heart, like, there's just something really messed up about that. And he didn't like that either. He was like, Jane, that's really weird. He's like, we almost drove through it. He's like, that's a trap. He's like, that's not normal. And I'm shaking right now as I'm thinking about this. And of course the terror is like mounting, and I'm like, okay, so he's like, that's okay, Jane. He's like, I'm gonna pull out, everything's okay. And we keep on hearing like scratching noises too, by the way, on the side of the vehicle, and it wasn't branches. Like, we'd be in the clearing, we'd hear freaking noises on the car all the time. And he got us out of that area, but we were driving again back into a more clear area, and and we were going to go back. The whole goal of that night was to go towards the OP so we can park a little bit before I get out of the car and look around with the night vision, get it all in camera. That was the whole goal. The mission of the night was to get out of the car at the OP during the nighttime and catch footage to see if we can be at the OP and see a Dogman. That was the whole point. So, he kept reminding me of that, because I was like, can we just go back? And he's like, no. He's like, Jane, come on, do you really want to? I'm like, no, okay. So we're driving along, and we're driving parallel to the forest, and like I said, the whole idea is to go back to the OP. So as we're driving parallel to the forest, I look down a grove of clearing where it's like a green belt where it's just grass in between the trees. Like it's a long grove of grass, and there's trees on this side, there's trees on that side, and there's trees behind it. And the moon just happened to be perfectly situated right above that area. I was pretty light without the goggles, and I just happened to be looking out my side, the passenger side window. When I saw down that grove, I see way high up in the trees a head of a dog. And it's so tall up the trees that, well, first of all, I saw the head. I didn't want to keep looking down the body. There was just too much going on that night that was scaring me, that I didn't want to see what the body looked like. And I know that sounds however, but I just couldn't handle that. All I could handle was just making sure that I saw what I saw. And what I saw was really thin, pointy ears, the classical description. In my mind, I'm like German Shepherd. I'm like, wait, no, more like Doberman, because they're so pert and pointy and tall. And the thing is, that head was really wide. And the fur, from what I can tell from the distance where I was black with silvery tips or something, like silvery. And I could see it facing me, and just the top of its head, if that makes sense, illuminated from the moon. And I looked at it for a few seconds, but I couldn't look at it. I didn't want to see I did not want to see its body. I did not want to see it. That would be too much. Because all I could, plus, it was really dark too. And the thing that it was so tall. That was what bended my mind the most, was that it's so far up off the ground. The mind is just not meant to look at that and reconcile it with nature, because it's just not normal. You don't see a dog head 8 feet off the ground. You're not set up to see that. So your eyeballs, when you take in that visual information, you're just like, what? So it was just too much for me. So I looked away. And at this point, I don't know if I'm whimpering or but I'm like, John, I just saw one, and he's like, okay. He's like, okay, well, he's like, did it move? I'm like, no, I didn't want to look at it, JD. I didn't want to look at it. It was stationary. And I'm like, can we please just keep going? And he's like, well, we're going to keep with the mission, because it didn't move, it didn't advance on us, and it didn't threaten us. So we're going to try to complete our mission, Jane. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. And I'm just floating in some kind of I'm just going to do this. I'm determined, But I'm just the more that we keep going, the more in my mind I'm like, I don't want to he can get out of the car if he wants. I'm like, but no, he can't leave me. He cannot get out of the car. I'm like, I don't want to get out of the car. In my mind, I'm like, if we get to the OP, I just want to stay in the vehicle and watch. I do not want to get out of the car with this thing that's right there. I would be insane. I have 2 little girls at home. That would be freaking crazy. So we're driving, and we're almost there. We're really close to the OP, and he's at a point where he's like, we should get out now. And he's like, see, Jane, he's like, is anything bad happening now? And I'm like, no. He's like, did that Dogman, you saw it didn't move, right? I'm like, no. He's like, it just stood there, right? I'm like, well, yeah. And he's like, well, so it's non-threatening, right? And I'm like, I guess so. I'm like, it's really scary, JD. And he's like, yeah, I know. He's like, but this is why you came out here. This is cutting edge, you know. This is the footage that you want. I'm like, I know. He's like, okay. He's like, he had this flashlight, and he's like, here. He's like, I'm going to show you. I'm going to shine the flashlight out to the left. I'm going to show you that there's nothing there. You know, we're going to look before we get out that there's nothing there. So he turned on the flashlight. He started to shine it out to the left, and he did, and then boom, it went out. And then, by the way, I had my phone that was like 50-60% charged battery in the glove compartment too, just for an emergency. That I later found out was completely drained, and like so drained that it took like a few hours just for it to turn back on while it was plugged in. So, but anyway, like, so that happened, and he was like, okay. And, you know, I'm getting real scared again, real scared again. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to go out. He's like, okay, so after the flashlight thing happens, we look at each other and we're like, oh, that was weird. And then a few moments later, like, we hear a thud again on the car. And this time it was just, it was horrible because this time it was too much for him. He decided, you know, the car was still on. He decided to drive, and the car was still on, so he wanted to get out of there. And I'm really scared. And he's like, he pushes the accelerator down, and it doesn't work. He's pushing it down again and again and again, and it doesn't work. And in my mind, I'm like, well, you know, when these things happen, you know, when a person gets into a car accident, I've been in a couple, like, things happen so quick, your brain is still able to process it and still try to, like, make reason of the sequence of events. So in my mind, even though all that stuff just took moments to happen, in my mind, I'm like, oh my gosh, the electricity system and everything is failing. So that must mean, like, the electricity system in the car is failing, and we're going to be stuck out here. It's trapping us. It's going to hurt us. And so that's going on in my mind, and he's trying to get out of there, and it's not letting us. But eventually, after like the fourth or fifth tap down, slam down with his foot on the accelerator, he was able to drive. And like I said, we heard that flap again. It was really loud and hard, and it made the car move. And eventually he was able to drive away. And I'm really scared at this point. I'm just like thinking that I might die, you know, because I don't know why it would do something like that. And you know, it was just so frightening. I didn't know what was going to happen next. It was the whole thing that made it so scary. And it was just helplessness, just complete loss of control of what's happening. So we were able to get out of there, and we had to go slow too on top of it. And we can tell something was following us and keeping pace with us. So we couldn't even go that fast because we didn't want to get stuck if there was mud or something. So we were driving slowly, and we eventually made it out of there. And when we were close enough to the house, you know, I tried to call JC, but obviously my phone was dead. His phone was dead too. And when we got close to the property, we saw that all of them were in JC's car, in his Jeep, I mean. And we saw the headlights facing us as we were approaching the property closer, and we all get out of our car. And JC's like, where were you guys? And we're like, well, we were investigating, JD was saying. And he's like, well, are you guys okay? And he's like, you guys were gone for a really long time. And I just, you know, he drove me up to the car, or up to the house, and I was just so frightened. I was just so scared. And I told everyone eventually what happened, and they could see how scared I was. And I think I was crying, or trying not to cry. I was trying to be tough and brave, and I guess I was, because, you know, other people would not set foot into that woods. But so I told them all, and well, they there was like a witch hunt after that, like a couple hours, well, not even a couple hours, like an hour later, everyone was in a truck ready to go back there and see what was going on, like what terrified Jane that bad, you know, they were kind of like, what the, you know, but, that's pretty much my Dogman encounter. I saw it, you know, I saw the head. It was really, really tall. It was really high off the ground. There's no mistaking what I saw. It was a dog head. It was a big dog head.
Was the Dogman you saw bigger than the Sasquatch you saw?
Yes. Yes, it was taller. It was much taller. I was looking through the night vision goggles when I saw the Squatch, and I did see it with my naked eye, too. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier. I know I did. It was a preliminary interview that we did, but when Bryce shone a flashlight at it, I was able to see it with my naked eye, too. And it was my impression that it was only about 6 feet tall to me. Like, it didn't seem that tall to Squatch. But the Dogman, on the other hand, was huge. It was just huge. Absolutely. That was part of why it was so terrifying. It was just so, like, a Squatch is humanoid looking, and it was a humanoid size. Like, you know, it was a normal size. But, that height was part of the thing that was so disturbing.
Oh, I think almost anyone listening could understand why you'd be so upset about an experience like that. There was a Lakota man who wouldn't set foot in the woods where you saw that Dogman. What can you tell us about him?
That's an interesting story in of itself. He was in contact with JC for weeks before I even made it up there, and JC was telling me about this guy who was exiting a bad situation. He came from a lineage that came from medicine men, so he was able to access, in his own words, he said, the ancestor spirits, and they were guides that he had vast experience with the spiritual world, and he had these guides, his ancestral guides, like he interacts with them all the time with his prayers. He knows all the sacred prayers, he says, and, you know, he walks in that path. And he was telling JC about how he was leaving the reservation where he was because someone, like, there's like two worlds in Native American culture as it pertains to what you would call magic or traditional medicine, or there is black magic that goes on, and that's where you get the shape-shifting and skinwalker aspect, because it's still alive and it's prevalent, sadly to say. I mean, it happens, and it's probably more common than people know. That being said, he was exiting a situation where he was attacked, because what happens a lot of times is if there's a bad medicine man, say, and he knows of a good medicine man coming to age or coming into his own, he's going to want to eliminate that threat before it even becomes much of a threat. So, like, it's not uncommon for people to die, for curses to be made, or people to be just straight up murdered in a normal way who are medicine men. So something happened to him where he had a wound on his arm that was caused by snake bite medicine, rattlesnake medicine, I think he called it. And so he was getting the heck out of there. He was telling JC all these things that, you know, JC is not a fool. Like, before I ever started working with him, he vetted me. He made sure I was the real deal, that I wasn't some crackpot weirdo, you know, because sometimes in this field you attract some, you know, interesting types that are just a little bit off, you know. So he vetted me and made sure I was, you know, a nice, decent person. And this man who had been talking to him, he really did know his stuff. He had some real good insight. Real good. And JC would tell me some of the things he said, and I was impressed. So he was slowly hitchhiking from where he was on the West Coast somewhere to JC. He was homeless. He had no other option. And JC and I are Christians, and we wanted to, you know, he wanted to help this man. JC did. He wanted to help give this man a place to stay, a work, you know, something to work, and, you know, just be a Christian towards him. Not, you know, proselytize or anything, but just love, you know, loving way. So he said, you know, come out here and we'll give you a place to stay. And, well, Ron offered up his home because Ron lives by himself. He has a big property and he needs help with stuff around, and it's like a farm. So Ron offered up his place. So by the time, like, the Lakota guy showed up, his arm was healed, and he had been having dreams and stuff like that. Like, an interesting thing I should side note too, like, which makes this whole question of cryptids
more deep than just, oh yes, it's a beast that lives in the woods and it's flesh and blood and it's real tall and it's got fangs and all that. There's more to the story. Now what's weird about it is like before I even, a few days, like a couple of weeks before I even got up to Minnesota, some strange things were starting to happen where I live. Like I said, there had been a couple cryptid sightings in my area, and there was one even on my property. Well, like a few weeks before I even went up there, my daughter had an experience where she heard Bigfoot chatter. And it was right after me and JC were talking about Bigfoot chatter, only we were texting it, and my daughter had no idea. She did not look at my phone one bit. She had no idea what we were talking about. It was the weirdest thing, and not only, I wasn't even by my house, we were outside a Walmart here in town. I can see the Walmart if I look behind my shoulder. We were in a Walmart parking lot that happens to be by some woods when she heard Bigfoot chatter, that samurai, she heard it, and she didn't call it that. She said, Mom, I just heard the weirdest thing. She's like, I just heard somebody talking really fast, like, she's like, it was weird. She's like, it sounded like it was coming from far away, but like right in my head. She's like, what was that, Mom? And I'm like, oh my gosh. And then after that, I was laying in bed, and my room has a window that's about 8 feet off the ground, and there's the big oak tree that's been there since I was a little girl. It's a white oak, and it's a beautiful tree. And there's, I have, a half an acre of woods right in my backyard. And it was about 11 o'clock at night. No, I would say it's late. It was later. It was about 12 o'clock at night. Everyone was asleep when I heard knocking. Really, really, really loud knocking. Like gunshot loud knocking. It was so loud that I could not believe nobody else in my house woke up. And it didn't happen once or twice. It happened hundreds of times, this knocking. And it scared me real bad. I was like, what the heck is doing this? I'm like, it's right outside my freaking window. And I'm like, I was too scared to look out my window, to be honest with you, Vic. I just did not want to see it. And, what happened was, I remember doing this when I was a little girl too. So it's just interesting. Like, I made myself go to sleep that night. I was so scared. I couldn't look out the window. There's not much I could do. I just made myself go to sleep and just tried to ignore it. And eventually, when you're asleep, you can still kind of hear things. Like, I remember it going away, or I just blacked out. But then I got woken up by it again at 3 o'clock in the morning. It was right outside my window again. It was so loud and so repetitive that around 3 o'clock in the morning, it woke me back up. So and the Lakota man was kind of saying the same, like he had been getting dreams and visions, like weeks before he even got there too. So anyway, when he made it to Ren's, it was only on day 2. He took out a ceremonial drum and he started doing a Lakota prayer. When he got a physical sensation, he said, and dizzy, like nausea, something like that. And then he said he was right by the house too, so he was in the driveway. And you remember I said that sometimes the dogmen like to scratch at the window or peer in the window. Well, he heard a scratching at Ron's window, which was I think 7 to 8 feet off the ground too, at least 7 feet off the ground, I'll say, because I was there. And he's like, I could hear it. He's like, it was scratching. And he's like, it did not want me to continue my prayer. I know that for a fact. He's like, it simply did not want me to just keep going. And like I said, like he turned out to be kind of like a wolf in sheep's clothing, and that's a long story. But he also heard on the 4th night, he was there alone. Around 11 o'clock, he heard something throw an unknown object against the outside wall of the house. And he said that while he was in vision mode and while he was dreaming and while he had been given several visions about the source of these dogmen, he was told in his visions that they are from a cult, a black magic cult, and they are shapeshifters. He was told in his dream. And that they were responsible for the activity. And that his ancestral spirits were saying that it was a cult that took on the form of large bipedal wolfmen. And that they were able also to take on other forms in animals to mask their appearance. He said that also that the spirits told them that no one would be able to ever film them or capture them. The spirits also told him that we should stop them too. So that was also a further point. But we didn't end up doing anything like that. But he would not step foot in the forest. Actually, he got out of that house. He didn't want to stay there anymore. It just didn't end up being a very good situation with that guy. I don't doubt him or, that this information was given to him. It's not that. It's just that there was some really big red flags about him, about his intentions, why he was there in the first place. Some things did not add up about it. Like, how people can appear as nice and good intention, but their actions convey a different intention. So it just didn't work out. But that was what his visions and dreams were telling him. But that's about as far as it went with him. He ended up just breaking off the association with us altogether. And that's kind of like a different story. But yeah, that's pretty much what happened with him.
That's all pretty creepy stuff. Let's talk about the after effects you've been dealing with because of that Dogman encounter you had. How's it been for you trying to get over that?
Well, when I first got home, like the first couple of days, it was so fresh. I was still processing it, like for no apparent reason whatsoever. I just find myself kind of starting to cry. Like I'd just gotten through something real terrible, you know what I mean? But at the same time, it was such a mixed feeling because I really just fell in love with JC's family. I just want to say this. They're just the most hospitable, loving, awesome people, friendly people, Christian people. Like, they're just good people, and I really, really, really like them, and they just made me feel so welcome. So I had that going on, like, and JC's son is awesome, like, just awesome people. I wish we lived closer, because we would be hanging out all the time, and they're like family to me now, I was real super glad I was able to have that experience. And then on the other hand, like, I had that horrifying experience, and certain aspects of it were so terrifying that, like I said, I just kind of cried for no apparent reason, just processing it all. But on the same token, it's like I wouldn't change that. Like I'm glad, as crazy as that sounds, like I'm glad it happened. Like I went there for that reason, I went there to capture an experience, to have one, and I did that. I was able to do those things. I was proud of myself too because I was brave. I like to say that not everyone would be as brave as I was during that, even though I'm not the bravest, certainly, I I was shaking like a leaf and I was asking to get out of there. I'm not calling myself a hero or anything, not by any means at all, but, I guess somewhat, I was somewhat brave, I guess, to even go through it all. So at the end of the day, I'm glad I did it.
The fact that you're able to hold it together and pull through that the way you did, that says a lot about you.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Because of all the thought you've been putting into your experience, you remembered a story a friend had shared with you when you were in the 6th grade. What did she have to tell you?
Yes, this is a close friend of mine that she was kind of like me in that we would have little talks about kind of paranormal things, and we'd always tell each other kind of spooky stories before we went to bed, and her parents were kind of open-minded about that kind of thing a little bit more than other parents were. I remember that. And one day she was telling me, we were outside, I remember pretty clearly, we were playing basketball, and she was saying, like, yeah, she's like, my dad told me something really weird. She's like, I don't know if he was putting me on, but I asked him, and he said he wasn't. He said he didn't want me to go out at a certain night for a couple of days, go outside at night for a couple of days, X amount of time ago, and I don't think it was very long ago. She's like, maybe last year or something like that. She's like, yeah, because he worked outside. Now, mind you, I remember him when he used to come home from work. He'd always be wearing an orange, day-glow vest because he did something. I don't remember exactly what. Oh, I know what it was. He worked for the roads. That's what it was. Well, this is coming back to me now. He worked for the roads, and so that's why he wore the orange vest. But anyway, he was working, I think, in southern Wisconsin again, where it was. And he said that a couple of guys, they were doing some night work, and one of them had seen some kind of upright walking dog thing. She's like, my dad believes the guy. He told me about this, and it was a close friend of his, and that him and another guy saw it. He said that it was like a man, but with like a wolf's head. She was calling it a werewolf. At that time, we didn't call it Dogman or anything. She said it was, she's like, my dad's friend saw a werewolf.
She's like, but it looked like a man, but it had like a dog's head, but claws, she said. And I remember all this because I was just thinking in my mind, I'm like, that is the weirdest thing. I'm like, really? I'm like, really? She's not putting it. She's like, I swear, that's what he said. And he says he's being honest. She's like, he didn't want me to go out. He was like, just for a couple nights. I don't know what, if he thinks he was going to travel all this way, but maybe. And I remember thinking in my mind, like, what if it did, and are these things real? And is that even true? Or, but it just, like, it's an adult, it's a grown-up, it's their dad. I know her dad and mom, like, they're nice people. Like, he wouldn't just say that. And just all these thoughts, I'm like, wow, that's just crazy. Like, that's so scary. And eventually I just kind of forgot about that. But, yep, I remember that pretty clearly now. I'm just thinking about it.
It's funny when you spend enough time thinking about an experience like that, all the things you can dredge up.
It is, because, like I said, I remember the time of day. It was a sunny day, and we were playing basketball, and we used to talk about those kinds of things, but mostly it was always ghosty kind of stuff. But I remember she was scared too. I remember when she was telling me about it, she looked visibly scared, like she believed it, and just the wonder of it all, just imagining something like that. And at this time, this is the early 90s, like I said, there's not a lot of talk about these things, and if ever anybody did, usually people are like, oh, you're nuts, or you've got an overactive imagination, and that's why people stay quiet about it. But for whatever reason, her dad, like I said, I think they're just a little more open-minded than some others, for sure. Like I said, she kind of had her own, paranormal experiences, and I think her whole family did, and that's generally, I think, why some people are more than others, maybe. They have a couple experiences, and that causes them to believe that there's more to this world, than meets the eye.
It does seem like once you have an experience with one of these things, it does in a way tend to open the gates.
Yeah. And that's kind of something I kind of explore in my research, and I don't claim to have any answers. I just kind of try to put things together and ask questions about them, like, why is it that once a person sees them, sometimes they'll have multiple experiences, whereas some people will live their whole life never having an experience? And what is it about? It always causes me to wonder, is it something about my bloodline that I have these encounters? Is it because my parents did, maybe their parents' did, that for some reason things reveal themselves? Like, I wonder about that kind of thing, and I've asked JC that before. He's like, I don't know. He's like, I've never really asked that question. He's honest. I think that's wisdom when a person says, I don't know, because we just don't know everything, It's, a lot of this is just such a big mystery, so that's a question I have for sure. Is it genetic?
Yeah, there are a lot of things about them that I just have to guess at. I don't have any firm answers, but I am convinced at this point that once you have an encounter with the Dogman, it does make it a lot more likely that you will have others. Don't know why that is, but it sure seems to be the case.
Yeah, it sure does. It's an odd thing. So now in the back of my mind, whenever I'm driving late at night or I'm conscious of it, I always kind of keep my eyes peeled and looking a little bit for something odd to pop up, whether it be a squatch or a Dogman or other. I don't know, and just, yeah, I mean, like I said, for like even me thinking about it, the weeks prior to going to JC's, it caused, I believe, some activity to happen. And I forgot to mention something that I believe made a big difference in that whole experience that I had in the woods at the height of my fear. And I believe that my prayer helped a lot. I prayed out loud, and that seemed to help in my mind. And I think JD's too helped the activity curb back a little bit. And if anything, it helped me in my peace of mind after I started praying out loud that, I was accessing the higher power. I was praying to God to just please help me, because a lot of times, that old saying, there's no atheists in foxholes. Well, it's true. Like, I am a Christian, but at some points you just have no other option. You have weapons, but if it's a paranormal thing that's shutting down your electricity, then what can you do, Oh, and the thing about the car, it wasn't the electricity either, by the way. It was that JD said that this thing lifted up the back of the vehicle. So he said it lifted it up, and that's why when he depressed the gas pedal, it wasn't causing the vehicle to accelerate. It was because the car was being lifted up on the rear end. During that time, he left out some details, and I forgot to mention, too, during my recounting just now, that he purposefully didn't tell me everything that he was observing while it was happening, because the state of my mind at that point I was so frightened that I was just on the verge of panic, and we were trying to avoid panic at all costs on my end. He was totally in control of himself. But another thing I left out on accident was when he was, one of the things that made him decide to get the heck out of there, aside from the gas pedal and all that stuff, was that he said when he was looking through his night vision goggles, now I didn't see this, but I believe him because there's no reason in the world to not believe this man. He said he was looking through the night vision goggles right around that time, and he saw 6 to 7 small little thin bodies about 3 to 4 feet tall. And that's another article I wrote, too, by the way, the little people of northern Minnesota. Like, all this weird stuff just happens to be in that area. Vortex, I don't know. But in any case, he saw these 6 to 7 little bodies just kind of scatter around with these kind of vaguely Asian eyes. Like, he's like, don't quote me as saying Asian because I don't want to be, I don't want people to infer anything. And I'm like, no, I don't think anybody will. It's just the way that they look. They're almond-shaped eyes. And they just kind of scattered about like they knew he could see them, so they kind of just went back into the woods kind of thing. I remember that moment, too, because I was sitting right next to him. He's like, I remember him looking through the goggles and being like, oh, God, we got to get out of here. And, like, that was one of the only times he showed any kind of, like, emotion where he was kind of scared, There was a couple times like that, not going to lie. He is one of the bravest men I've ever met. But when he saw that, he didn't want to tell me. He's just like, nothing, Jane, I'll tell you later. And he did tell me later.
If he did see it in the rear view, that had to be one sight to see.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's something I'm going to have to ask him again. But we heard something keeping pace. The breathing was there. It was pitch black in that direction. I know he had his lights off, but we would have had the brake. But no, yeah, if the lights are off, the tail lights are off too. So he wasn't putting on the brakes or anything. So he was putting down the gas pedal, so I don't know if visibility would have been on his side anyway, so.
Yeah, I can't imagine what that would have been like. Please tell us about the book you're writing about cryptids.
I was asked to write a book a few months ago, and it's weird because I had already started writing, and what I was writing already was, and the publisher was giving me the option to write about whatever I wanted to, which was nice, so. I told him, I'm like, look, I'm already, coincidence, I already happen to be kind of putting some ideas together, and it's just, what I'm putting together here is just a collection of stories that I've been involved in, whether they're stories that happened to me over the course of my life. I'm 34 years old. I've had so many different weird circumstances, stories, encounters, and I've met some really interesting people and just had some really interesting unique experiences. Just the people I've met, and just the associations that I've been asked to join and things like that just are odd enough, I think, to put them together in a collection and put it into book format because for one, it's good for me to just kind of put it all out on paper. I'm a writer anyway. I like to write. Just to put it all, collate it and organize all these stories just so I have something to reference to later in life. And so that's kind of what I'm writing. It's kind of like an autobiographical, but it's just focusing primarily on those aspects, on a lifetime of these strange happenings.
Well, I'm sure you're really talented at it. I can't see how your writing wouldn't be a great read.
Oh, thank you. I've had the privilege and honor of knowing some really good writers. I've got some really great people in my corner that have been encouraging and just wonderful. So I'm just very grateful for them and all their help and their advice. So all these people we're kind of stick together in this little community of ours, and we help each other out, and I'm very grateful for that.
Well, I can understand you being grateful for their help. Jane, it's about time for us to get out of here, but before we do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Well, I guess if anybody that lives in that area, northern Minnesota, if you guys listening have any stories to share, to reach out to you or to me, if I can leave my email, janeg123@hotmail. That's Jane, JANEG123@hotmail.com. I'd just like to know if you've seen any kind of activity like that up there in the North Woods, too, in that area. And also if anybody listening has ever seen that kind of stick man type of thing, that also would be very interesting, just so I know someone else out there in this big world of ours that has had that kind of experience, and I can relate it to my dad, too. I'm sure he would be grateful for that.
Oh, I'm sure he would too. Yeah, when you see something like that, yeah, you're so hungry for answers to try and find out what in the world it was you saw and what you were dealing with. Fear of the unknown is a reality. When you have an experience like that with something you didn't even know existed, yeah, it's only natural to try and dig up as much info on what you experienced as possible. So, yeah, that's no surprise. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show tonight and sharing all that with us, Gene. I really do appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Vic. Thank you so much for your help and just dealing with this experience. It's just wonderful to be able to get this off my chest. And like I said, it's one thing to even write about the experience I had. I know I mentioned while I was relating the experience that it's one thing to write about other people's experience and to live it. Well, it's another thing to write about the experience that I had and to talk about it verbally. It's part of the process to get over something that's so scary, to talk about it, and this format that you have provides a wonderful venue for that, and I think you're doing a wonderful service for people who have had these encounters, and I hope that people out there who are listening, who have had their encounters, seriously consider coming to you to relate it for their own peace of mind, that it really does help. I can say from experience, it helps to share this with someone who is understanding as you are.
I can't tell you how happy I am to know that the conversations we've had have helped the way they have. That's great news. Well, have yourself a great night, okay?
You too, Vic. Have a great night. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.